Hey guys, so before I start this tutorial, I'll be doing a materials list. The paper I'm using is Strathmore toned grey paper. The three type of pencils I'm using are Faber-Castell Polychromos, Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils, and Prismacolor Premier pencils. And for anyone wondering the exact colours I'm using, they're on screen now, so take a screenshot and try and match them up the best you can. Once you've picked your colours, it's best to make some samples and to do some colour testing. Use a small piece of paper and keep it next to you throughout the whole drawing. The outline process is something you do not want to get wrong. There's three methods that I'm going to talk through which you can use to do your outlines. The method I'm going to be using is the graphite transfer method. It is the easiest and most convenient way to get your outlines. There are three ways to do your outlines. I recommend starting off with the grid method and then going over to the transfer method. You can sketch, but it will damage the paper if you're constantly rubbing out your lines. I'll have a link to a YouTube video down below on how to do the grid method. And if you cannot sketch, I advise you to work on your sketching before you do the grid method and before you use the graphite transfer method. So my initial first step is to find a process that works to create the right texture. So once I have an idea of the process that I'm going to use, I begin to make steps in my head that I can use throughout the whole drawing. Step 1, I outline the details and highlights before putting in the base layer so I don't lose a pencil sketch if I blend over them. Step 2, layer down the colours lightly. Don't add too much pressure yet with your pencil. Keep adding pressure gradually over time until the colour is smooth. Step 3, once you have your base layer colours down, begin to blend them out using small circular motions. I have plenty blending tutorials on my Instagram and my YouTube if you need to improve your blending. So I've said a lot in the last 1 minute and 30 seconds, and it's a lot to take in if you're actually following this tutorial, but you can go back and watch it if you need to. For the next half of the time lapse, I'm just going to finish off the top lip and then I'm going to show my process on how I draw the teeth. So if you have the ability to blend, you'll be able to draw teeth. So for step 1, put down the highlights first. Use your highlights as a guide for how dark the teeth are. The highlights are white, so you'll be able to judge how dark the colour is next to the white. In this case, for the corner tooth, it is pretty dark because it's in shadow. For step 2, once you get the correct shadow, begin to blend them out using small circular motions. Once you put down the base layer, you're basically done the tooth and you can move on to the next one. And for step 3, sharpen up your highlights and add in any small details that you haven't already. I keep repeating this process for each tooth, it doesn't change. And once you do one, the rest are pretty simple and straightforward. Just take your time. You're basically blending a dark grey into a light grey and adding some blue tones and just highlights. And if you follow this process, your teeth should look realistic when you're done. And continuing on to the lower lip, it is exactly the same process as the top lip. Put down your highlights first as a guide for the colour around it. then adding a light base layer as a guide for the color. It's very similar to the teeth, but I do prefer this process, so I'm sticking with this process. The highlights on the bottom lip were a lot more detailed, so instead of trying to find them after I blend, I'm adding them in first. And here is some real-time footage of me actually drawing. I know this video is all time-lapse. I thought I'd add in some real-time footage so you can see how fast I'm actually going. I'm taking my time. I'm not trying to finish this drawing in the quickest time possible. I'm trying to create the texture that I want. So even though the bottom lip is a lot more complicated, I'm following the same process that I use for the top lip, and I'm adding it in to the bottom lip basically. I'm marking out the details, I'm blending around the details, I'm adding the highlights, and I keep layering, then start blending a bit until I'm happy enough with what I've done. I'll move on to the bottom teeth. So again guys, enjoy this time lapse of me finishing off the bottom lip. So I'm going to pop back in when I begin the teeth. So the bottom teeth are exactly the same as the top teeth. There is no difference whatsoever. I'm just taking my time. Some teeth are lighter than the others, simple as that. So for this mysterious fruit that I don't know what it actually is, my first step is a light base layer because it is extremely complicated looking. My second step is put down the small details as a guide before you add more layers. This fruit is not straightforward, and it was quite challenging compared to the rest of the drawing to make it actually look realistic, but I got a process going which I thought did the job, and it was good enough. I could have made it a lot more detailed if I wanted to, but it would have taken hours and hours and hours, and that's what I didn't want. So when I add more details around the side, I'm going to move on to the center of the fruit, which is the most complicated part. So for step one, put down your highlights first. It was the easiest thing to do, to use the highlights as a guide. Put down a mid-tone in between the highlights, basically a base layer of one color, and then you can add your dark reds and then your light reds. So for step two, it's basically add the darker tones, and I do tint the highlights a small bit with a bit of purple. Step three is pretty simple again, sharpen up the highlights and add the small details. For the first portion of this fruit slice, it was very complicated. I wasn't comfortable at all, but I was trying to develop a process which I could use to finish it. If you have to look at the reference, which I'll have linked in my bio below, it is extremely complicated to look at, but I'm breaking it down as much as possible. Will basically trick the eye and people will think it's really realistic and really detailed. It is somewhat detailed, but it is not that detailed. So I keep working my way around the fruit using the same process of adding the highlights, the mid-tones, and then darker or lighter, and that is basically it for the whole drawing. So guys, if you did actually enjoy this tutorial, please subscribe. I'm going to be posting at least one YouTube video a month in 2023. I'm so happy to be back on YouTube and to be posting again. Thank you so much guys for 100k on Instagram and for 4,000 subscribers on YouTube. I really appreciate your support, and I'll have so many projects that I'm going to complete in 2023.